Welcome back to the Adrenal Fatigue Podcast. Danielle and I are very excited to be back here with Dr. Holly, one of our naturopathic doctors. And today we're doing a part 2, as we promised, to our other conversation about perimenopause. If you haven't listened to that episode, we really recommend you go check that out. On that episode, we talked about perimenopause, what it is, when does it start, and then Dr. Holly explained the most common signs and symptoms, how chronic stress influences these symptoms, and most importantly, what one can do proactively to make the transition easier, and what you can do if you're already in that stage already. So today we wanted to focus the conversation on somewhat atypical symptoms that we see with lots of our clients, the ones that are less talked about and with perimenopause and menopause, like sleep, mental emotional issues, body composition changes, and more. So thank you so much, Dr. Holly, for being with us. Welcome back. We're excited to start this out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we'd love to start by just having a little recap of what menopause is and how you know you're officially in it.
Good question. Yeah, a lot of people actually don't know this. So menopause is actually just a moment, and it's the moment 1 year after a woman has no periods. So the average age is about age 51. And then prior to that, it's called perimenopause, when periods are still happening, although sometimes irregularly. And then after that moment of menopause, it's called postmenopause.
And I think that's actually really important information that a lot of us don't really realize, that perimenopause starts quite a bit earlier than you would think and can go anywhere from like 1 to 10 years before actual menopause?
Yeah, up
It's
to
quite
10
a big
years
range.
usually. And the early symptoms are a little harder to identify. So that's why I love, having this conversation. So
So important.
yeah.
I remember learning that from you for the first time and being very, very surprised.
Yeah, a lot of women are. It's really fulfilling to work with this patient population, because a lot of times women who are in perimenopause seek healthcare. A lot of times women are seeking healthcare for the first time really in their lives. A lot of women maybe with pregnancy if they have children, but prior to the 40s, a lot of women don't get a lot of healthcare. And so things start to shift, and oftentimes primary care providers don't necessarily correlate them with hormonal changes. So it's a time in women's lives when a lot of these atypical symptoms will show up, but providers aren't really making the connection that oftentimes the root of these health changes are actually hormones.
Cool. It just makes us all the more excited to jump into this topic in more detail and more juice today. And like you guys were saying, I think a lot of our listeners even said they were so surprised, they didn't realize it could start so early and that shift could begin 10 years before. So maybe just to jump back a bit, like what are the common or more typical
common ones
that we're talking about?
Yeah. So usually the ones that get more recognition or attention are the classic ones, right? And these are often like almost caricatures, unfortunately, but things like hot flashes and night sweats. Irregular periods is a common one where, maybe a woman has clockwork periods for most of her life, and then she starts skipping cycles or having a cycle every 3 weeks. Irregular in both timing and then also in flow. So sometimes they'll start becoming really heavy or really scanty, or sometimes alternating between those two. I say those are the most common and the ones that most often get more attention in the doctor's office too.
Okay, cool. So we're excited to talk about some of the atypical symptoms because, again, less talked about. And I think it's a really important part of this conversation because, like you said, these symptoms start to show up and there's not even a connection to the hormones, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the most atypical?
So I'm going to start with the less common and then move into the ones that I think are really common. So some are cardiovascular symptoms. So some women will notice maybe cholesterol will go up on their blood work. Sometimes blood pressure goes up during this time and that hormonal connection. A lot of palpitations, especially like anxious palpitations, can really manifest in the perimenopausal years. A lot of women, I've had so many patients say, they've had to get a cardiovascular workup because they thought they were having, serious cardiovascular symptoms. They get the all clear, but then the symptoms persist. So usually that's when we want to look deeper at hormone stuff. After we know everything is okay and there's no risk, you start looking at more subtle things. Skin and hair changes are a big one. So sometimes it's hair loss, sometimes it's changes in the collagen in the skin, and that could be part of it. Sometimes acne will start to show up in this period of time. So skin and hair changes are really common, sometimes hair loss or kind of a changing in the hair pattern on the scalp. Even hair loss elsewhere in the body, like eyebrows or leg hair or pubic hair, things like that, that can take people by surprise. And then skin changes can be changes in the elasticity of the skin, sometimes acne or rosacea. Those kind of conditions can crop up in this time too. Part of that is because there's some changes in the microbiome, which is the good and bad bacterial organisms in the body, and they're everywhere in the body. So they're also on the skin, but also in the gut and even in the vaginal canal. So some women during this time will get more UTIs or yeast infections or things like that. And that's because the microbiome in the genitourinary system changes when hormones change. Things like headaches. So especially if someone is prone to headaches, like maybe they'll historically have had premenstrual migraines or premenstrual headaches, they'll start to come more often and more seemingly randomly with other hormonal shifts that happen throughout the month. Body composition is a big one. So it may be that metabolic needs change. So oftentimes it's a good time to kind of reassess what is the diet, and sometimes macronutrient ratios need to change. I'm sure, you could speak on this too, Danielle, because it's, I always like to share with patients that we don't have the same nutritional needs from birth to geriatric years, right? They change. And so during hormonal shifts like perimenopause, that's often a time when diet needs change. So body composition shifts along with those changing needs. And then the last big categories are kind of like the mental emotional things. So insomnia, I put under this umbrella. So sleep changes can be really intense. So either difficulty falling asleep or difficulty staying asleep. And that tends to kind of snowball and be correlated with a lot of other mental emotional symptoms. So during perimenopausal years, I see women have a big shift or increase often in anxiety and depression, or just feelings of mood kind of being out of control. So a lot of times it will show up as irritability or impatience. A lower tolerance for stress can come up. So that's a big part of the connection with adrenal hormones, is that when the female hormones shift with the ovarian function changing during perimenopause, the adrenal hormones shift too. And so adrenals, as I think many of the listeners here know, are kind of the first line for the stress response. And so when they're being called into action more, the stress tolerance can decrease. So things that maybe you could let kind of roll off your back in the past are now a lot harder to tolerate. And there's a shift in a sense of resilience, I think is a good word for it. That tends to change during this time of life too, for a lot of women.
So I just want to stop you there. I think we're both interested in digging deeper with that.
Yeah, go for it.
That's a big list. I just wanted to say, and I know that just working with our clients, even myself, my friends, those are things that are definitely happening for a lot of women out there.
Yeah.
And then you have compounded on that just the responsibilities of, if you are a mother, entrepreneur, all those things can really impact and just kind of layer on top of each other. I want to pick this apart a little bit more, but I just wanted to say that and I think a lot of these things also can be contributed to we're just getting older, right? Our bodies aren't as resilient as they used to be, but just knowing that there is a chemical component and a hormonal component to this, that a lot of these actually can be addressed at a root level that really aren't being talked about in traditional medicine, which I think is just so important, and why I'm just, again, so glad we're having this conversation, that we're putting some of these connections together. So thank you. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is that some of these symptoms, like especially the low stress tolerance and the body changes, like those are some of the most common complaints that we often hear about. I mean, all of them link in and have their time and place, and, you know, people are experiencing all of these symptoms, and we come to see them almost as just like expected. You know, my mother kind of had the same thing, and this is just the cards I've been dealt with, and almost seeing them as normal signs of just getting older without really questioning that there might be a more easy and like a more fun way to live without all of these symptoms, if we were to just tap into them and put this connection together. So it's so powerful and empowering in its own sense.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think this population is so fun to work with, because there's so much to be found there, you know, and you can get, I mean, you have to look at it in a really holistic way. I think also in this kind of midlife period, a lot comes up, right? It's often a time when women are still working. If they have careers, they're often taking care of potentially like ailing parents. Some are also mothers. And so the demands are high. And so one of the things, I know you do this a lot with clients, Angela, is to kind of look at, you know, where is support, right? So to oftentimes it's learning maybe for the first time to move away from habits of kind of taking it all on, taking care of everyone. It's such a common theme amongst women. And so some of it, I think, is situational, right? The demands are high. And it's unreasonable, really, for women to carry what they're expected to carry. And so some of the stress tolerance or lack of stress tolerance is that the load it's too big, right? It's too heavy for one person to bear. It shouldn't, you know, I don't want to get into like cultural and all of that, all those elements of this, but it's real, right? It does have an impact. Also, you know, there is a biochemical piece, right? So I always try to work with patients and share with them, you know, we're going to work on the biochemical side. And with many of them, I will also have them look at, you know, working with someone like you, Angela, to look at how can they also make some shifts in their habits and in their mindsets, and not continue to take so much on, you know, more than really is, like I said, reasonable. So
it is a really good opportunity. I'd say that, like, this is the time when you want to actually, maybe for the first time in your life, start to learn how to set boundaries, learn how to ask for help, and really take your health seriously, because it is really important. And how much that can, like you said, it's like even with a few small changes, right? Even just addressing the hormones, even just initially, and just starting to even see the connections, like you can actually, I see this as like even just some of the low-hanging fruit things, right? Like getting a few things dialed in can make a huge difference. Making your sleep a priority, like you can start to see huge results when you start to address and make sleep more of a priority in your life, and things like this. But I think it does come down to just really making your health a priority, and boundaries. And we could go on and on, but I think, like you said, it is a beautiful time in your life to, for once, take a step back and take some inventory, and what areas in your life need to change. And maybe that even just starts with, you know, getting your blood work, and then from there, maybe doing some more thorough hormone testing to really get even deeper into what could be going on.
Yeah. And just even talking about this connection, because there's a lot of people who might not even have this awareness, because this is the first time they're hearing about it. And so you might go to the doctor with one of these symptoms, and like, I'm even thinking of like family members, right? Like going in, having sleep issues. And it's so easy to just see that one issue as like a solo thing without looking at the big picture and all of these connections. And then maybe it's getting put on a sleeping pill, or, you know, if it's more gut related, you might be just looking in one area, but not looking at the whole hormonal connection and like the whole seasonal transition that you're going through. So I'd love to, if we can, just like dig into how these symptoms really connect and how the adrenals come into play on that, if we could.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, part of it is when in perimenopause, one of the things that kind of leads the hormonal shift is the ovarian function starts to slow down, right? So we've talked, I think, in the past about how when you're talking about adrenals, you really can't separate the other parts of the endocrine system, right? There's the hypothalamus and pituitary and adrenal axis, and all of those glands, you can kind of think of them as like stops on the same freeway. So they're all producing different hormones. They're very much interrelated. I would include the thyroid in that too, because thyroid hormones also have a lot of crossover with these hormones that are produced by the HPA axis. But what happens is when the ovarian function declines, the adrenals are partly designed to kind of pick up the slack to make some sex hormones. So your adrenals make a hormone called DHEA, and DHEA is a precursor to the sex hormones. And so in an ideal situation, when you go into perimenopause, your adrenals are really robust and you have this beautiful reserve. Not many of us go into that, right? So a lot of us go into perimenopause pretty run down and depleted, right? Especially women who have had children and who have the nutritional depletion that can come with pregnancy and lactation. So when we go into perimenopause in a more depleted state, then the adrenals don't have much reserve to make up for what the ovaries are no longer doing. So that reserve doesn't exist anymore. And so everything just kind of becomes tapped out. And so the background DHEA production is usually struggling, and the adrenals don't make as much DHEA because they've been busy most of the decades prior for a lot of people making more cortisol, because cortisol is always going to trump sex hormone production because it's a survival hormone.
Good awareness to have. Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
yes.
Good.
Yes. And I think, again, so empowering for people to kind of put that connection together of how the adrenals are going to pick up some slack, if you will.
Yeah.
Through this transition, and how important it is to, I mean, wherever, it's never too late, right? And
right.
I think that's a good reminder too, because some people are fully in it, some people are not there yet, or maybe encroaching in on this season, but it's never too late to support.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the part of this that's so exciting is that a lot of people, especially with a lot of these mental emotional symptoms, they come in feeling rather hopeless, right? And there's all kinds of stuff to unpack there, right? A lot of people feel inadequate because they're not able to just handle the demands of their life. There's some shame with it too, because oftentimes women will have been recommended maybe an anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication, and that doesn't feel good to them. They're not feeling like that's a good fit, but they also feel like they need something to make life feel more manageable. So yeah, I think it is really helpful to know that the biochemical piece is so significant.
For sure. So what would you recommend for people who aren't quite there yet? Let's say going more from a preventative outlook. What could you do to prevent these symptoms down the road?
Good question. So I mean, a lot of it is some things that we've kind of alluded to maybe, but some of it is just not waiting to put your health first and to put yourself first. I think one thing that we often do in our culture is all the goals are like outward and these big, huge goals, right? We all have bucket lists and all this stuff, but we don't have a lot of encouragement for us to do more of just an internal or self inventory. And there's a few things that I consider like foundations of health where I want people to focus. And this is a part of what I do in the new patient intake, is just look at these key things and look at areas where they have a struggle. We all typically have one or two areas that are difficult. And I know as we go through them, you know, all of the three of us will probably think that's my area. That's where I have a hard time.
Yeah.
But it's just to look at, you know, it's an honest assessment of how you're doing. So it's looking at things like, Danielle, your area diet, right? So as you know, it's never too late to change your diet and to get a positive benefit from that, right? Down the line for years, really. Hydration is another one. So that one is one that seems so easy, but that so many of us tend to overlook.
I
Sleep.
always say with hydration, like a dehydrated body is a body in stress already, right? So
Yeah.
we don't think of it necessarily that way, but yeah, nutrition. I mean, that could be a podcast in itself because I feel like I could totally wormhole on it. But yeah, that's just like basic nourishment can be so. What I love about it is makes a really big change right away.
Yeah.
Like you can often notice a change tomorrow, but then how those benefits compound, especially over the years when you're being proactive about it, is all the more profound.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think
as with all of these tips, I'm pretty sure you're sharing in their own way, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a cumulative benefit. And then what you said about with hydration being or dehydration being stressful for the body, with any of these foundations of health, when they're out of balance, they are stressful on the body, right? So I think we often think of stress as just mental or emotional, but physical stressors are just as hard, right? So if you're not eating, right, or maybe only eating one meal a day and your blood sugar is low all the time and you're hypoglycemic, your cortisol is going to go up, right? And your body's under stress with doing that, right? Yeah. Dehydration is the same thing. Not having enough rest, you know, both at night, sleep, you know, that one's a huge one that we're really chronically sleep deprived in this country.
Yeah.
In our culture as a whole, not just in this country, but I think all Western cultures. We don't value sleep and rest very much at all. And rest also during the day, just mental breaks, and valuing rest and valuing those check-ins that you can have with yourself during the day of, you know, what do I want to do? That could be an option besides just pushing, right? So many of us just push through the day.
Yeah. I think when you said it comes back to when you were saying, if you don't mind me jumping in here.
Go for it.
When you said about the reserves earlier, this idea of sort of letting your cell phone, right, go to like no battery, like 2%, right? That's kind of what we're talking about with all of these, like understanding, like, if you have not yet thus far been good at like reserving and like, you know, making sure you have enough to battery and you're taking time to for not just self-care, but like just the basic foundations of health and making hydration and diet and sleep a priority. Like you said, Holly, like stress is not just physical, emotional. Every time that you're eating, if you're eating something that your body doesn't digest well, or if you have something going on in the gut, all those, right, are individually themselves stressing the body in some form. So we just have to keep remembering that, like, that's what the self-inventory is. It's the mental, emotional, as well as all the other pieces that you're talking about. So I just, you're beautifully explaining this and laying it out really nicely, I think, for all of us to see. And I would even encourage all of you out there listening to like get a piece of paper out and like, you know, make a pie and put all these pieces in as a piece of the pizza pie and and see where you'd like to start and what patterns are you really knowing that needs some attention, and getting some clarity from this podcast, and putting it on paper really does help.
That's so true. Yeah, it is. I think all of these, like, there's so many layers. We could probably do a podcast just on this, but there's so many benefits that can come with assessing these. And this is one of the things that I encourage people to do regularly because it changes, and often in ways that are subtle. You know, one of the things I love about working with patients is that I'm taking notes, right? And so usually if I'm seeing someone every like 3 to 6 months, 6 months down the line, most of us don't know how we felt 6 months ago, right? And so it's really valuable to go through and be like, so how are your headaches? Oh, I don't have headaches anymore. Huh, forgot about that, you know, or how's maybe we're only pooping 3 times a week, right? Like in the naturopathic world, we want you pooping every day. So it's looking at things like that.
So important. That was what was happening with me. TMI, but like that was my world when I was suffering with adrenal fatigue. I had no idea that you were supposed to go every day.
Yeah, people
Little did
don't.
I
I mean,
know, I
we
had
really
some
don't
serious
have.
digestion issues.
A lot of us don't know much about what's happening in our bodies, really to no fault of our own, but it is really not part of our education. You know, a lot of women that are coming to me in perimenopause have never tracked their periods, right? So they don't know how much valuable information you can get. This is another huge part of self-assessment, right? Is tracking cycles and seeing, are your symptoms cyclical, right? A lot of women have cyclical insomnia, for example, and don't make the connection because they're just, you know, maybe a week, a month, they're not sleeping well, but that might be the premenstrual week, and it's very likely that it is. So it's really helpful to know that, especially when you're seeking treatment like naturopathic care, like what any of us do, where it's really individualized. And it's not a one size fits all thing. You know, insomnia that's premenstrual versus mid-cycle insomnia might be treated in different ways. So
what's funny about that too, and what I've even found with clients, but I've noticed this pattern in the past with myself, is you might have one of those weeks where you haven't slept well and you're having like all this anxiety or all these feelings popping up, but you might feel that you feel it frequently, but you're not putting together exactly how frequently that is coming at that. Maybe, for example, the premenstrual month or that premenstrual week, sorry. So even just like thinking of one of my own experiences where I just spent a lot of money being anxious and overwhelmed because I hadn't been sleeping well, and all of those symptoms kind of cascaded. And it's like, you're buying like new pillows, you're reaching out to your naturopath, you're getting all this support because like you feel like it's coming to a head, but then you like, you get your period and everything levels out and you're like, man, that was an expensive week.
Yeah. It's true. You can kind of start to spin out, right? Especially with sleep deprivation, everything seems awful, right? At least it does for me. I don't have no tolerance for sleep deprivation anymore.
No. But having awareness that, oh, I'm in that week and I know that like, I just need to get through the next couple days and I'm gonna, get back to my old self. And it's a sign that you need to work on something. Like there's probably something swinging a little too high or a little too low. And that's where the integrative approach can be so supportive. But just that awareness is just so nice because you can plan around it and be a bit more compassionate with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that that's kind of coming into the conversation with hormone health too, is that even so, if there's no pathology at all, right, with just normal hormone cycles, there are ebbs and flows in energy, in, mindset and moods and things like that. We're not meant to be even Steven every day all the time, right? We're humans. So I was so excited to see recently on a fitness app, there were recommendations for women, 4 different sets of exercises for the 4 different phases of the menstrual cycle.
I love
this was
that.
like a major brand fitness app. Yeah, I was so stoked to see it because energy levels change, right? And we can be hard on ourselves when maybe we're having a grouchy week, or if someone's into fitness a week where they don't feel very strong, and that can feel really heavy and hard too. But it's great to have some awareness and also self-compassion that we're not going to have the same output level every single day. We're not robots.
Yeah, I could totally wormhole down into the topic of rigidity around like this type of thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people want to work out the same way or have the same diet, but not realizing like, well, we need carbs to ovulate, right? So maybe during certain times in our cycle, like we're gravitating towards more carbs, but not allowing it. I mean, like sometimes if we're just in allowance of the flow, and often that rigidity in our community with a lot of our listeners, it might resonate with you guys out there. There's often that rigidity in like the way that we work and like our routines, and like it can lead to the whole burnout cycle. So I didn't mean to digress too far away from what we were originally talking about, which was how we can prevent the symptoms down the road and, prevent having too many of these symptoms down the road. But I feel like that these are such such important and powerful points. I'm just like so excited that we went a little deeper into them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know,
thank
me
you,
too.
Holly.
And now I have all these other ideas for things to talk about next time.
I think it's really important to talk about.
Yeah, I too. I think I kind of completed the list of foundations of health, but a couple things just kind of on the tail end of it. So I covered sleep, rest, diet, digestion, hydration. We haven't talked about movement. So another one is doing an inventory of movement on the note of fitness, right? So not necessarily having to do some prescribed exercise every day, but just being aware that our bodies are built to move and finding what feels good, what kind of movement feels good. And then stress perception too. So Angela, I would love to hear what you have to say about this too, but in that kind of self-inventory, I think a big part of it is, one of the questions I ask patients a lot is, how much of your day do you spend feeling frazzled, right? Are there critical or key points every day that you spend feeling more frazzled? Like you're aware, if you know you're frazzled, your cortisol's probably up, your adrenaline's probably up. And is there some work that we could do together to kind of shift you feeling that way if it tends to be a predominant feeling that you have throughout the day?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And understanding, where your energy is going, your physical energy also, and your mental energy and emotional energy. What are those, and what are the things that you're constantly replaying in your mind, right? What are the thoughts and the worries that are constantly coming through as in replay over and over? And so sometimes just a simple exercise is just writing some of those things down. And then those can come with, reframes, things that you can put in the place of some of those statements, some of those thoughts. And that's a good place to start, is just like you said though, Holly, just the awareness is an important piece, to be aware of what you're thinking, because what you focus on persists and grows. And that's one of the most important things I think that I work with my clients on, is just, first of all, the awareness without the judgment. And then you can really make some powerful ground from there.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like there's so much bang for your buck just doing that. And really, I think so much of us struggle with that. I know I personally, that's an area for me that I'm always kind of having to redirect myself and reassess.
And we all do. And that's what we have to remember, is not to beat up on ourselves, but like, oh, cool, I'm recognizing that I'm totally judging myself right now. Or I recognize right now that I'm totally comparing myself to the other mom. I am me. I am who I am. And if I can be me and know that I'm okay, even when I'm anxious, I'm okay. And how can I shift to a place of feeling better? What's a simple action I could take? Because a lot of times we're in a place of reaction. And if we can move from reaction to a place of action, and when I say action, I'm not talking about working out or, a action is just maybe actually asking yourself a question, like, what would it take to shift this? Maybe changing the room that you're in. Maybe it's going for a walk, right? It could be something like that. But just really being able, like you said, redirect, reframe, and doing it with compassion for yourself along the way.
I love it. Yeah. And then the last couple of things I had on the list, so this is really, really in the same vein, but, rather than spending a big chunk of your day feeling frazzled or stressed, are there ways to increase time during your days where you feel more joy and connection with either other humans or with what you're doing during your day? Does it feel like it's in alignment? I think this is part of the reason that burnout is so common, and why burnout can often be a gift, because I think it happens when we're really out of alignment with how we're spending our time and our days in some cases. So kind of assessing that.
So true.
Okay.
Very well.
That was a long answer, but I think I hit the I think I hit the points on that one.
Yeah, thank you. And so I would imagine that a lot of this is going to overlap into the next part of this question, which was, if we're currently experiencing these symptoms and wondering what we could do, I can't imagine how any of this wouldn't really tie in.
Yeah. So if it's current, same thing, but maybe with more urgency, like get the paper now. Um, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it's really a lot of the same questions, same assessment. I always tell people in any stage of this, actually, and I didn't mention this before, but if you're having hormonal symptoms, so even in perimenopause where other symptoms are mild, but maybe a woman who's had like endometriosis her whole life, right, or super painful periods, um, it's always good to assess, figure out what's going on, do some testing and try to get a baseline for what's happening. So this can be helpful really at any point in perimenopause with any kind of hormonal symptoms, right? Because there's so many different hormones involved, like I mentioned before, with the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, and thyroid gland, right? So they all produce their own hormones. And there are benefits to testing some of the hormones that are secreted by those glands. And so I never encourage people to kind of guess or self-treat because, for example, with just insomnia, that can be caused by a progesterone deficiency. It can be caused by a melatonin deficiency. It can be caused by excess cortisol. It can be caused by low estrogen. We don't really know just based on how the symptoms are presenting. Sometimes you can get pretty far with kind of doing a thorough intake and then putting pieces together. But I love testing too, to get a real clear picture of what's going on. And then you can really target your treatment and treatment goals.
Yeah. I think that too, if you're just like in the moment, like why waste time, right? Like just kind of streamline and get that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is what we love to do in our membership programs. Like in our program, we all work together to really help you get clarity, whether it's hormonally with testing, doing the work with Angela around mindset and the self-inventory, nutrition, bringing all of these bits and pieces together. So anybody out there listening who does feel like they need more support, we'd love to invite you to check out our membership program, the Adrenal Recovery Revolution. The link is in the show notes for anybody interested in kind of getting more support, more protocols, really dialing this in once and for all with just clarity and confidence. I just wanted to let you guys know that that's available to you if this resonates and you're ready to get some help. Another question I wanted to ask Holly, and it kind of ties into just what we're chatting about. I had a client recently and we kind of went to the worst case scenario. Like she had all this anxiety around what if I'm in menopause? At this point, she's done, like she's had kids and kind of at that point where it's not really about having kids. So we were like, well, I was asking her, like, what are you so worried about menopause for? Like, if that's the worst case scenario that you go into it now early, like, what is the biggest concern around that? And her concern was the symptoms. And then I was happy to kind of reassure her, like, well, we're not going to let you like experience all those symptoms. Like, in my opinion, that's like unmanaged menopause. If you're really struggling through every bit and piece of that transition, would you? And so it's kind of a double-parted question. So for the people who are really struggling with those symptoms, they can have that hope that there is something that you can do about them to make that easier.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And actually it can turn around pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So definitely it's good to, keep hope, keep
and
hoping.
Not stay in that struggle.
Not stay in it. Yeah. I mean, I always love it when a patient comes in, earlier along with more of a mindset of prevention and just wanting to optimize wellness. And I love that. But that's the minority of my patients. Usually, unfortunately, women come in, they find the time when it feels critical, right? So they're really at the end of their rope. And so, yeah, there's so much that can be done.
Yeah.
Even if you have, the list of symptoms above, even if you have every single one of them, which is unusual, but even if you do, there's still a lot that can be done to help reverse those.
Yeah, I love that. So inspiring for people out there. The second part of that question that I wanted to ask was, and this is actually really common in our community as well, because sometimes due to chronic stress on the system, women will kind of have entered a faux menopause. Like they've entered menopause almost early, but it's because everything's been so suppressed that they're not actually able they haven't been able to get a period for a while. But when you look at their hormone testing, you can understand why, not necessarily that things aren't working, but just everything is so suppressed that you're not at a point where you're actually having a period. So you may feel like you're in menopause and experiencing some symptoms, maybe directly like maybe those atypicals, maybe those more typical symptoms that we discussed earlier. But for those people, and I mean, this was me, I didn't have my period for a year, like in my 20s. And back then I didn't really realize that wasn't exactly normal. I was kind of like enjoying not having it despite all the symptoms at that point. But is there, I guess I just wanted to, for those women out there with that, experiencing that right now, it is possible to get your period back in a lot of cases, would you say?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there is such a thing as early menopause, but that's very rare. Premature ovarian failure is another term for it.
Yeah.
It's very rare. So most of the women I think you're referring to who are experiencing this set of symptoms are just in burnout, really. And burnout is not age dependent, right? That can occur even in teenagers. You know, I've had some high school patients that have had these kind of struggles. So I think, yes. And it's always really exciting and kind of refreshing when you can reach people who are younger in life, and the ripple effect of them improving their health is so great, right?
Yeah.
Because I wish somebody in my 20s too had talked to me about cyclical moods and periods, and you know, being overstressed and overdoing it and undersleeping and all the things that I know I for sure did, and even having some pretty healthy influences. So it's a great opportunity for women of any age to kind of do that self-assessment and look at, you know, what's your body trying to tell you, and then try to make some shifts and seek support. Yeah.
I love that. And I really think that for each generation that follows it, I hope it's going to just get easier and easier, and women will feel more empowered and just kind of more aware of cycles. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah. I think it's happening. I think there's
so
a lot
too.
more education about it. I have 2 daughters, and even with them, like, they have a lot more exposure, even outside of me. Obviously they hear a lot from me, but even at school, and, you know, there's books and online classes and things like that targeted to very young girls and children. So
yeah,
we're getting there. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, that's so great. Just having this education and awareness is so helpful. And I wanted to just take a moment to just, share. I think this conversation has been so helpful, and Holly, you have such a great way of explaining it, and in a way that we can all like digest. And I wanted to, I know a lot of people are looking to seek support. So if people are looking for that support and know that someone's out there like you who is looking at this, you know, from a holistic and naturopathic perspective. Can you just tell us a little bit about where we can find you? As actually, you're obviously part of our collective. You're one of our naturopathic doctors on as part of our team, the Adrenal Recovery Collective. But if you wanted to share anything else about where we can find you or anything else, we'd love to hear.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I work with telemedicine, so I see patients from all over. And the easiest place to find me is just my website. So it's drhollygerman.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
This
has been really fun. I think one of my biggest takeaways is the importance of tracking. And one of the things I just want to reiterate is this tracking your cycles and how powerful that can be. I know, Danielle, you talk about this with our clients all the time, and the power in that, and how, you know, if we could be more in the flow of our monthly cycle and those stages that are happening each month and honoring them in a way, I think that can make a huge difference as far as, especially with burnout in general, and just supporting the hormones with just being able to see our lives as a little bit more of these patterns, and being aware of our patterns, and hormonally as well, and compensating, you know, appropriately, or, you know, and filling in the gaps. And when we have those, we know we're going to have maybe a week where we're going to be tired and we're not going to have as much energy for our children and whatnot. Like, those are times when you plan, you set aside nights for yourself, you ask your partner if you can get away for an evening, or, it really does make a difference when we plan ahead and we can see where we can start to fill up our reserves, like you said, and recharge our batteries. So I think that is just such an important point. I wanted to just bring it home with that. So thanks again, Dr. Holly.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is always so fun.
Yeah, maybe just a little quote to wrap things up from our girl, Louise Hay. She always said, I'm going to make the rest of my life the best of my life. And I love that, just to, polish off this conversation where women may have thought that menopause was going to be like your mom's, like it was for your mom or your grandma, and thought, having these feelings that it's going to be difficult, or if it is difficult, knowing that it doesn't necessarily have to stay that way. There's a lot you can do. And reach out for support, whether it's with us or somebody else that you resonate with. But I just love the hope that this conversation can really generate. And thank you, ladies, so much for having this conversation with us today.